Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Penguin Random House Book and Author Festival, hosted by Library Journal and School Library Journal. My name is Migdalia Jimenez, and I'll be moderating the Illuminating Book Club's Picks session. But first, I'd like to cover a few housekeeping items. This session is being recorded, and it will be available in the virtual environment for 3 months. If you have a question for our speakers, click on the Q&A icon. We'll try to save some time at the end for audience questions. We do not have chat enabled, but near the end of the session, we will be sending you a PDF with details about all of today's authors through the chat window. Live captioning is available. You can either display a subtitle or show the transcript, and you can save the transcript at any time. Note that while the recording will include subtitles, the transcript will not be available on the recording. If you prefer to listen to the audio via a phone, click Audio Settings to access a dial-in number. Also, please join us on Twitter with the hashtag PRHBookFest. Now, I want to introduce today's speakers. We have Danielle Henderson, the author of The Ugly Cry, a hilarious and heart-rending memoir that redefines what it means to be family. We have Paul Mendez, author of Rainbow Milk, a coming-of-age debut that grapples with race, class, and identity. We have Eric Nguyen, author of Things We Lost to the Water, a debut novelist with one of the most anticipated books of the year. And we have Michelle Zauner, author of Crying in H Mart, a memoir that builds on her viral 2018 New Yorker essay of the same title. So thank you to each one of you for being here. We're so excited. So we're going to start with a question for Danielle and Michelle. You both wrote excellent memoirs. They were each so visceral and vibrant and made me feel like I had lived through these parts of your lives with you. Tell us what it's like to write about and share such intimate memories with the world. And we're going to start with Michelle. Your memoir has been described as a food memoir. It's a lot more than that, but it's also about your mother. So if you want to start, tell us what it's like to write about such intimate memories.
It was a very enlightening experience. I feel like I learned so much about myself and my family during this journey. And part of the reason why I really wanted to write this memoir was because I wanted to sort of relive some of the really beautiful memories of my mother before illness entered our lives. So that was a really important part of this process, was getting to really revel in those types of memories. Because for a long time, after living as a sort of caretaker for 6 months, it was really difficult for me to remember my mom before she was sick. And that was a truly heartbreaking reality. So I feel like so much of writing this memoir was kind of like excavating these sorts of memories that I could enjoy again.
Thank you, Michelle. And Danielle, yours was also a memoir. It was also heartbreaking in a lot of ways. But in addition, it was one of the most hilarious books I've ever read in my life. So tell us about that.
I agree with Michelle in that it was an excavation. And for me, it was more about not necessarily writing for the kid that I was, but writing for the adult that I am. And, my book really deals with a lot of the ways that my family became fractured, and I don't have a relationship with my mom currently. So for me, this was really an act of finding that grace to write about when things were good, but also using humor to acknowledge that this is just a strange situation all around. No one that I grew up with was living with their grandparents. My grandparents are characters in their own right, and it was an adjustment. So I think that it just helped me heal the parts of myself that had always pushed those memories to a bad place and just find the graceful place with it. So it was very revolutionary for me as well.
Thank you. Thank you so much for that. Um, Eric and Paul, you both wrote fantastic novels that read almost like memoirs. They're so personal and so raw. Tell us about how and why you chose the novel format and what the freedoms and limits you get from writing fiction rather than memoir. Paul, if you want to begin.
Sure. Rainbow Milk was initially based on autobiographical fragments, but my publisher felt when I submitted it to her that I was holding something back, perhaps out of duty to the people involved. So it was suggested to me that creating a fictional framework might release me from having to stick to the truth and facts, and hopefully unleash my imagination. I'd never written fiction before, so I'm really glad to have been trusted with that responsibility to my story, because it really sort of helped me to think of things in a universal way, I suppose, rather than just, woe is me, this happened to me. I sometimes think, however, that memoir is more difficult for that reason than writing fiction, because to sort of remain disciplined to the structure of language and of storytelling, whilst sort of sticking to your personal experiences in a sort of very factual way, I think is very difficult. So all respect to memoirists. But what I've achieved with Rainbow Milk is, all the characters and scenes in the novel are fictional, but they're also very much in dialogue with, the people I've known and the situations I've been in.
Thank you. Eric?
Yeah, I think I agree with Paul in that, like, for me, when I write nonfiction, there's always like this block that you can't write for whatever reason, because like maybe they might be real people. My book, when I started writing it, it was more autobiographical. But I felt again like that block that I couldn't really tell that story. So writing fiction gave me that freedom to kind of make stuff up, to get to the truth of what I was trying to explore. And like once I started like writing it from a perspective of a family that doesn't even look like mine, really just opened up ways to have these characters and their stories come to life and talk. So there is freedom from not sticking to the facts in fiction. But I think there's also that limitation if you're writing like realistic fiction. You have to stay true to like the location. Like my book takes place in New Orleans. I had to like research New Orleans to get New Orleans right on the page as much as I can, because that's part of the narrative and people want to be immersed in that. So I think like it gives you some freedom, but depending on what genre you're working in within fiction, there are also like, I guess, tropes or guidelines you have to work with, especially like with realism, which is what this novel is.
Thank you. And, feel free, even if the question doesn't, is not directed at you, feel free to add anything that you like.
I'll jump in.
Yeah, please do.
Because I think it's fascinating, and I don't know if Michelle, if you've had this experience too, but I think that a lot of my friends and people in my life ask me, is it strange to write a memoir? I could never write a memoir about my family. Like I wouldn't want my mom to read it. I wouldn't want anyone to read it. And I think there was something really freeing for me in the fact that, I've talked so openly about this for so long with the people in my life and with my family that none of this will come as a surprise to them. And I could have fictionalized it, but I think for me, it was easier to actually just tell the story. But that's, I think, only because I did not have that primary worry of who's going to read this. Like my family is well aware of my feelings about how I was raised.
Thank you. So the next question I have is about immigration. It played a large role in many of the books, and it's definitely a universal and timeless topic in certain ways, yet also so specific to each of these stories. Talk about how the theme of immigration shaped your book. And Michelle, if we can start with you.
Sure. I think I didn't really know how much immigration really impacted my life specifically with my relationship with my mother until I wrote this book, honestly. I mean, certainly it has shaped my life a great deal because I immigrated to the US when I was a year old, and it was a very formative experience for who I am. But so much of the book was really uncovering how important my mother's home country was in this way. I I feel like growing up, my mother and I just clashed because of, idiosyncratic parts of her character. And in writing this book, I think I just came to realize so many points of contention came from just these differences in our upbringings and her life as an immigrant. And so much of her of the joys that Korean food brought to her was, this home country that she was only able to visit every other year. And I think that I realized my mother hid so much of her homesickness from me and my father growing up. And when I began to have a new relationship with her older sister, it was, I was really struck that so much of her memory of my mother is talking about how she wanted to return home, or to visit home, or how much she missed home, because that was just not a part of our relationship that she really revealed to us. And so, yeah, I feel like it was immigration I came to realize was so much a bigger part of my life than I thought it was in writing this.
Thank you. Eric, would you like to go next?
Sure. So the impetus of my entire novel, I would feel, is like that immigration of my characters from Vietnam to New Orleans. I feel like that is the main driving force of that story. I mean, without like my characters fleeing Vietnam after the war, there wouldn't be this story that happens to them in New Orleans. So I felt like without it, it would be nothing. But I think as a writer, I'm just really interested in migration, why people move, why people stay. And I think that really shows in my characters. Each character, basically, they either make the decision to move or stay. And like, I guess part of my reasoning to writing this novel was trying to figure out why someone would move, why someone would stay. Just imagining being in their shoes from like having to live in post-war Vietnam and the conditions there, and then growing up in the South as a person of color, or like a queer person of color, why or how they would decide to stay where they are in the South, or why they might flee somewhere else that they think might be better or truer for them. So I think the whole novel is just an exploration of why people move, why people stay. And I think, again, like that's the driving force of the narrative and why characters do what they do in my novel.
Thank you. Yeah, that I really felt that while I was reading it. Some people, stayed behind. Some people came to the U.S. And then even afterwards, different people moved to other countries in the subsequent generations. Thanks, Eric. And Paul, your book deals with the Windrush generation, which I feel like here in the U.S. Many people may not have heard of, but that was very central to your book, right?
Yes, so for anybody who doesn't know, so the Windrush generation are so named for the Black British, Caribbean, Black British African, and South Asian immigrants to the UK from 1948 till around 1970. That's sort of classed as a generation. And so in 1948, the then Labour government introduced new legislation to say that all British subjects from the Commonwealth were now British citizens and were free to come and help the post-war effort to help Britain sort of get back on its feet after the Second World War. And it's only sort of emerged really in the last few years that this was never supposed to apply to Black and brown people. This was only supposed to apply to Australians, Canadians, and New Zealanders and South Africans, whose, in David Olusoga's words, quoting from the government at the time, whose stock could be absorbed into the British population. So you've got whole loads of problematics there, right from the get-go. And every sort of 15 years or so, the law would change to sort of tighten up and turn off the tap of immigration from brown countries and black countries without resorting to racist language. So it was really always about sort of Britain's kind of standing in the world, especially as it was trying to sort of differentiate itself as much as possible from the Nazi Party of Germany, who were responsible for so many deaths of Jewish people and people of color. Anyway, so the Windrush scandal hit the news in December 2017. And that came about because the government had wrongly detained hundreds of tax-paying British citizens under discriminatory immigration laws, having destroyed the landing cards of hundreds of people who had arrived as children under their parents' passports in the 1950s and 60s. So people were being deported, people were losing their jobs, they weren't allowed to claim benefits or work because they didn't have the right documentation. So it was a very sort of toxic broth not of their own making. And the scandal sort of hit the news in December 2017. And it got me really thinking as I was starting to write Rainbow Milk about my grandparents who moved here, all four of them from Jamaica in the mid to late 1950s. So they were unaffected by this actual scandal, but the children that they left in Jamaica to move here, who they ended up not being able to send for, would have been affected if they had. But it anyway got me thinking very much about the lives that my grandparents did have. And I especially wanted to think about my paternal grandfather, who was a fit, healthy, strong man. I didn't know very much about him at all. So this is where fiction writing comes in, because where you only know a few facts, you use fiction to sort of create a world around those. As soon as he moved to the UK, he started to suffer with blurred vision and migraine headaches, and he lost his sight. And he ended up moving back to Jamaica while my grandmother stayed here, looked after the two children, including my father, worked, etc., etc. And I'm kind of thinking, this kind of, during a time of serious racial tension as well, what were their lives like? And very much like Michelle was saying at the top, I just really didn't think about my status as a person, as an immigrant, or as the descendant of immigrants, until I started working on this book. Because I'm third generation Black British, so I'm sort of socialized as being, effectively white British. I have my little differences, obviously being the color of my skin, but you're sort of socialized to ignore that. And so this was my first sort of real reckoning with that, my first real, questioning, who am I as a Black British person and as a third generation Black British person.
Thank you. And that's a good segue to the next question. I want to talk about own voices. It's a term that refers to an author from a marginalized or underrepresented group writing about their own experiences from their own perspectives, rather than someone from an outside perspective writing as a character from that group. And also windows and mirrors. The idea is that windows allow us to view and understand experiences different from our own lives, building empathy, and mirrors reflect people like ourselves, our family, and our culture, helping us feel a sense of belonging. How do you feel your book fits into these concepts of windows and mirrors and own voices? Eric, would you like to start?
Sure. So my book's definitely like an own voices book. I'm Vietnamese Americans. It's about Vietnamese Americans. And I felt like while writing it, it was really trying to make a mirror for the life that I grew up with. Not necessarily like, it's not autobiographical, but like just the everyday lives of my characters, just like hearing Vietnamese pop up in the middle of English. Like I have like code switching within my novel. And I felt like that was really just natural for me to do. because it was the way I grew up. It was what I heard, so it was part of that too. And then along with language, there's like just cultural stuff of like what we celebrate, what we eat. That was also in the novel. Again, that's me trying to make a mirror of what I had when I was growing up. And I thought, like growing up, I didn't really have a lot of Vietnamese American narrative, so I thought it was really important to have an honest depiction of those things in my novel, just because growing up, I didn't really see that. And I wanted to give that to other people as well and just have that experience be part of the, I guess, the literary conversation that, hey, Vietnamese Americans, Asian Americans, this is our story. We are part of America. Listen to us. So I really feel like this is, at least for me, a mirror, but I also see it as being like a window for non-Vietnamese people to see what the refugee spirit experience was like, what growing up Vietnamese American felt like or was like, because they see how my characters, especially for my queer characters, they'll get to see how it is to grow up and come into your sexuality. So I feel like, yeah, my book is definitely its own voices, a kind of mirror and window looking into the lives of Vietnamese Americans.
Thank you. I think it did such a great job of that. Danielle, would you like to go next?
I would. My book is definitely a mirror. It is 100% a mirror in the way that it's reflecting something that I haven't really seen in literature, which is part of the reason I wanted to write it. It's a very strange undertaking, and it feels a little bit selfish to say like, I'm going to write a book about my life. And for so long, I think that, therapeutically, I didn't think my story was important for anyone else to hear. I thought it was just, something for that everyone goes through something. Everyone has families that are different in some way from what they wish they were, and I'm not any different from that. So it took me a long time to look into that mirror and to say, actually this is a little bit different and it's something I've never seen before. And a lot of people grow up with their grandparents, and I don't really see those stories. And in Black culture, I know that there are lots of multi-generational stories, but not all of them are memoirs. And so it was just important to me to reflect the things that I remembered, because that's really what this book is. It's kind of my most poignant memories, crafted around a timeline. And the window aspect of it, I think, applies as well, because it's really showcasing something that, again, I think is missing from the bigger stage, which is that, Black people are not monolithic. I grew up listening to heavy metal and punk rock and, wearing Black eyeliner as lipstick because we didn't have Black lipstick back then, except on Halloween. I really stood out not only in my town, but in my culture. And it took me a long time to connect to my own Blackness as a result, and feeling like I belonged to this thing that I instantly, belong to because I grew up in it and I was raised in it and I am it. So I think that window aspect kind of works both ways for me, in that it's showing people that lack of monolithic, Blackness is important for everyone to understand. But also it was important for me to write in that way because it reminded me that my foundation has always been pretty strong in that way. And I've always kind of been who I was. Which is cool. I'm 43 now and I'm still very much the same person. I was just listening to Metallica all weekend to the detriment of my neighbors. But it's again part of that healing process. And, the own voice, I feel like I don't know what else to do. I have to write my own voice. I never try to write in a different style. It's important to me that, all of the, the energy and the vibrancy and the humor and everything that is part of my life, even when telling difficult stories, is on the page. I can't help but write my own voice.
Thank you. And I know that sharing your story really means a lot. It's going to mean a lot to people as they read it, because your stories were just really beautiful, really gorgeous. Yeah. Do you want to go next, Michelle?
Yeah. I'm confused if I'm a window or mirror. But
You can be both.
I think that's like sort of the nature of memoir in general. You know, it was funny. I had this realization that, you know, I studied creative writing in college, and I was really, you know, I took every creative writing course available except for nonfiction, because I never thought I was going to write it, because I liked, you know, writers like Richard Ford and Philip Roth and John Updike, and I wanted to just write stories without any kind of pretext. And so I felt like my identity was too confusing, even if I were to write fiction to, you know, talk about this mixed race character and have to like explain so much. You know, to preface a story. And especially when you were writing, I was writing a lot of short fiction in college, like, you know, you only have so many pages to get a story accomplished. Like I was very concerned about having like three pages of backstory that would, you know, be wasted on that. So I remember even writing short fiction about my aunt who had passed away, and her name is Eunmi, and I changed her name to Emmy. And instead of eating like Korean food at a table, they were eating like chicken and broccoli, because I thought that's what white people ate. And yeah, so, you know, I think that for me, my story came from, you know, it came from a real sense of urgency had. I didn't really have an audience in mind. I just needed to tell this story of what happened in my life. And it came from a very, you know, organic place. And I didn't, I all of a sudden felt like I had to tell my story. And I feel like in a way it was, yeah, I mean, it allowed me to have my own voice in a real way. I had a similar experience as a musician where, you know, I played in bands for 10 years before I found any sort of popularity. And I always kind of like hid in the back, like, because I wanted to be like sort of like masculine presenting, because I wanted to be taken seriously as like all of the white men in you know, the sort of like emo indie sphere. This really, and I wanted my musicianship to be at the forefront, so I would write sort of over complicated guitar parts and all that kind of thing. And it was only until I really fell into my natural voice that I sort of started to see like that my work was really beginning to resonate with people. So I feel like I really was only able to come into my own voice until when I was like 25.
Well, I'm so glad you were able to, because it feels you can feel yourself as an individual, and then you in the context of your culture, and it's really great. Thank you. Paul, would you like to go next?
Yeah, thank you. I was just thinking, actually, there's a window and mirror sort of situation in one of the scenes in Rainbow Milk. So Jesse, my protagonist, is 20 years old. He's new in London from a provincial part of the country. And, you know, he moved to London without a plan. And he sort of finds himself at an estate agent's window looking at property prices and rental prices. And of course, when you're looking into a shop window, you can see your own reflection. So it's a mirror as well as a window. And inside, you've got two estate agents, both sort of quite smartly dressed, professional, both at their desks working. And so Jesse is sort of watching them for cues as to how he should act and, you know, how he should dress, etc., if he's going to be able to get a job, but he's also sort of looking at, you know, how much money he would have to earn in order to be able to afford one of the flats. And this is a really sort of nice part of London as well. So you've kind of got a mirror window situation there, because they can see him watching through. And as far as they're concerned, he's just a black teenage boy standing outside the shop window staring in at them. And he's aware of that. He's aware of his presence and what it does in certain situations where he's not expected. And he can see one of them reach for the phone, and he runs off because he's scared that they're going to call the police or something. And I've sort of been accused of being oversensitive when it comes to racial microaggressions or the expectation that something's going to happen because of your presence. But I really feel like that scene, and I didn't write it for this, but I really feel like that scene confirms what James Baldwin once said about, you know, as a Black man, you're always aware of other people's responses to your presence. So that just came into my mind just now while we were talking about windows and mirrors. But, you know, generally speaking, I don't want to sort of absorb the pressure of being, a Black queer British novelist and having to sort of speak for everyone. Like Danielle was saying, Blackness isn't a monolith, Black queerness isn't a monolith. My musical taste is slightly different from yours, Danielle, but I love post-punk, I love new wave, I'm a big Joy Division, New Order, etc. fan. And I don't see that represented necessarily in literature. So it's just really important for me to be as close to the truth as possible. And I think I probably got a bit carried away because Rainbow Milk is absolutely full of pop music and pop references. And, I just wasn't really interested in even being cool with it. There's so many sort of pop groups and pop bands who are probably quite untrendy, who are all given equal respect in it. But I just wanted to write for the purpose of charting my transition from being a devout Jehovah's Witness, someone who was baptized and sort of had this whole hope based on that, to 5 years later being a sex worker dealing with sexual assault, living by myself and without family. What happened to me in that time to sort of, cause that kind of trajectory? It wasn't for any audience, it wasn't for any sort of teaching purpose or anything like that. It was simply for for me to chart my own growth, and for catharsis, and that it's been able to find readers who have been able to sort of identify with the aspects of Britishness and of Blackness and of queerness and of all of these things, spirituality that I've depicted. I'm very grateful for that.
Thank you, Paul. Everything that you guys said really illuminated that about own voices and windows and mirrors, and it's not just one. I remember that scene from your book, and it was metaphorical in the best way possible, and it was also very real, like you say. It was real. So we actually have time for one last question. Since this session is called Illuminating Book Club Picks, I have a question about that. We know that book club readers read books differently than individual readers. They tend to look deeper and make more connections than the average reader. How do you imagine your book being read by a book club? What are the interpretations and/or disagreements do you think they'll have in their conversations? And Eric, would you like to begin?
Sure. So my book is told from the point of view of three major characters, and each of them, I guess, represent, or they are like different types of Vietnamese Americans. Like you have the mother who's born in Vietnam. She came of age there, and then she moves as a refugee to the U.S. You have the first son who was born in Vietnam but came to the U.S. at an early age, and then you have the second son who, though he was born overseas, he basically all his life he only knew of New Orleans and Louisiana. So we have these three kind of clashes in point of views. So I feel like that would be rich. I hope it's rich for discussion for book clubs, because you have three different people, three different ways of telling basically the same kind of overarching story. And I could really see like people leaning towards one point of view or another, especially when the conflict comes, to see like who is right, who is wrong in their actions. So I feel like my book has a lot of space to talk about, again, because of those three point of views from different people and what their experiences are as Vietnamese Americans, as refugees, as immigrants, as men, women, queer, straight. So there's a lot to, I guess, unpack there because of the three different perspectives.
Definitely. Your book definitely has really rich characters and a lot of situations, emotional situations that people are going to resonate with. Would you like to go next, Michelle?
Sure. I'm not sure what I expect from book club readers. I'm really looking forward to hearing about it. But I think a couple of things that might come up are the ways in which the characters in my book cope with grief. I think that that's like such an individual experience, and it'll be interesting to see people who have experiences with grief, what sort of characters they map onto and managing that. And I think also feelings of belonging and not quite belonging in a number of communities and sort of staking your place. And I also think that, you know, the mother-daughter relationship that is the sort of focus in my book will be hopefully a hot topic. I think, you know, a lot of people have had sort of contentious relationships with their family members and have gone through, especially a lot of teenage years of conflict and friction. And so I'm looking forward to people perhaps sharing that. I'm also really excited. I was very nervous about writing this book because, you know, being mixed race, you know, it almost feels like I don't have the agency to talk about either of my cultures. And I was honestly most concerned about the Korean reader, feeling like they didn't see themselves in my story, and if I really had the sort of agency to take that on. But luckily, as I've started to do sort of more interviews, it feels like I've at least gotten some things right. So I'm excited to hear about how people sort of map their experiences with that as well onto that.
Definitely, thank you. I think grief is, you have a line in the book about once your mother passes away, that you've divided the world. The world is divided into two types of people who have dealt with the death of a loved one and people who haven't. And I feel like that's going to be a really big, really important discussion for people to have. And also Mangchi and YouTube cookery and stuff like that. I think people will have fun with that. Paul, would you like to go next?
Yeah, I'm really interested in that point that Michelle was just making about the agency to write about the cultures that you belong to. I mean, I'm fully Black, like fully Jamaican British, you know, but I feel that too. So I think there's just always going to be that. There's no, as Danielle was saying earlier, there's no monolithic way of being anything. And Andrea Levy, one of my favorite authors, the late Andrea Levy, who wrote Small Island, said, you know, if there are 500,000 Black people, there are 500,000 different ways of being Black. So, you know, what we're looking for is people's individual perspectives as authors, you know, the universe that we create. And, you know, the universalizing experiences. You know, in my novel, I've written about 9/11. You know, I'm not from New York. You know, I've been to New York for 3 days in my life. That has got to change. But, you know, as a British person watching that as a 19-year-old in 2001, I was massively affected by it. And there was a before 9/11 and an after 9/11. So that belongs to me as well, that experience and that memory. It's deep and it changed me. Yeah, you know, coming back to the question of book groups, I would like to think that there's enough in the book that everyone can find a little thread to find a little bit of communion with, to find some dialogue with, whether that's to do with race or music or food or working in a restaurant or being a Jehovah's Witness or, you know, anything. I'm just hoping that each individual person does find something. And so far, a lot of different people have said a lot of different things about the book. So I'm just really delighted to hear all of this myriad of responses.
Yes, there's so much in your book to talk about. And as you mentioned at the beginning of your comment, you talk about 9/11 and you talk about the day of the Brexit vote results. Yeah. That spoke to me. And I know that there's going to be a lot of readers that will kind of go on that, on not quite a tangent, but talk about where were they during those moments and what it meant to them. So plus everything else. And Danielle, thank you so much. Danielle, do you want to go next?
Yeah, absolutely. I think that book clubs are going to have a lot of fun with my book because there is so much humor in it. And I talk about things from, this book kind of runs the range from the time I was born till age 18. And I talk a lot about growing up in the 80s and how it was kind of like the Wild West, where your parents would just push you outside for the day during the summer and say, see you at dinner. and that was kind of your life, and how like nobody defecated for the whole summer because no one was allowed in a house to go to the bathroom. Like I do not remember using the bathroom as a child at all. So I think that there will be those kind of pivotal moments where people can relate to the time that I'm talking about. I also think that, again, there's that connection to grandparents that a lot of people have, or being raised in multi-generational homes, that will be easy for readers to connect to. But I also feel like they're going to have what I hope is a good kind of whiplash, because the humor and heartbreak work in tandem in my book, and that's just the way I talk and live and write. So I've been told that, you know, people are cracking up on one page and then crying on the next page, and good. Cry tears of blood. So I like that though. Like I think that will give people, to have such visceral emotional reactions like that, I think will give people a lot to talk about and to wonder why, you know, this particular chapter brought this emotion out in them. And that, you know, I think it'll just give, based on the book clubs I've been involved with, I think that you're always looking for a book that will help you kind of talk about your own feelings and your own emotions and your own thoughts. And so I hope that my book can do that. And so far, that from the feedback, I think it can. And there's also, you know, there's this, I think the main component that people will probably relate to is this notion of motherlessness in a strange way. Like I'm motherless, even though my mother is here and alive. And, you know, I have not had a mother since I was 10, essentially. And her relationship to us prior to that was kind of like Cher and Mermaids, where she was very like more of our friend, and like wanted to be, she was young, you know, she was in her 20s, and she's kind of was walking that balance between being a 26, 27-year-old woman and being a mother of 2 kids. And she made some terrible choices. So one of them being my stepfather. And I think that's also something that is not talked about a lot in our culture, that, you know, a lot of people live with drug addicts and drug addiction. And my stepfather was one of them. And I think that, you know, the violence that I experienced at his hands was related to that, but also was related to the abandonment that I felt for my mother. So I think that even when I lived with her, I didn't feel like she was there for me or protecting me and my brother. So I hope that brings up some conversations about parenting and how you parent yourself, and finding the parenting that you need in different ways in the world. So yeah, I think this would be a good book club pick.
Definitely it will, and there's so much to talk about. I can definitely already imagine everybody talking about what their favorite, like the funniest line, because you just have the best lines. I just took like notes, so many notes on how funny. So thank you guys so much. So we're almost done. We're going to open it up to questions. We have a few people who asked some questions, and so let's see. Nancy said, this isn't a question. She said, I'm reading your book right now to Michelle. It's wonderful, and I think I will use it for my group discussion at my library. Somebody said, where can I find a title list for these books? We're going to have that at the end. We're going to have a share at the end. Did you want to say something, Michelle?
Oh, just thank you.
Let's see. We have somebody ask, for everybody, do you feel taking a real story and melding it with fiction to create a mix of the two takes away the weight of the real story and its details? So we probably only have like a couple minutes more. Is there somebody in the panel that wants to answer that? Do you feel taking a real story and melding it with fiction to create a mix of the two takes away the weight of a real story and its details?
I think the important thing here is the storytelling and the story that you want to set, that you want to tell, the people who you want to tell it to. You know, I think that all stories really are a combination of observation, imagination, and you know, memory. So, you know, and that goes for, you know, the most fantastical fiction, and it goes for autobiography as well. So, you know, I don't think it's interesting to always focus on what is fiction and what is fact. because, you know, even, you know, people like Alan Hollinghurst, for example, you know, one of the greatest writers in the world, he's going to be writing within a particular sort of frame of reference. So, you know, born in the countryside in England, gone to a public school, gone to Oxford University, loves classical music, the arts and literature, etc. He's going to be writing within that. And that's fine. And nobody ever sort of pulls people like that up for saying, you know, this is fictional or this is biography. It's really the key thing is like, what is the best way to tell this story? Is it through just retelling the experience as is, or is it through exploring you know, fictional crafts and techniques in order to create this slightly different world that I think, I can't remember who said this earlier on, but to get the real truth, I think it was you, Eric, who, you know, to get the real truth out of it, sometimes you have to go into fiction. So yeah, I hope that helps.
Yes, that was great. Thank you so much. I do believe that's all the time that we have left. I do want to thank each one of you. Danielle Henderson, everybody go get these books. The Ugly Cry by Danielle Henderson. Thank you, Danielle. Rainbow Milk by Paul Mendes. Thank you, Paul. Things We Lost to the Water by Eric. And Crying in H Mart by Michelle Zahner. Thank you all for being here. And thank you everybody for attending today. This session will be archived and available soon in the live sessions area. Please remember to save the transcript now if you wish. Don't forget to visit the exhibit hall and the sponsors booths for giveaways, downloads, and resources. We hope you enjoy our next session, Real Life Narratives. Bye. Thank you, everybody. Thank you.